I want to share with you a truly special story, my own story. This story revolves around a situation I faced with my mother-in-law, a challenge not small in the world of marriage, but also an opportunity for me to learn and grow. The story took place one evening, which I thought would be just like any other family dinner. However, everything changed unexpectedly. My mother-in-law, the person I always tried to treat well, suddenly forbade me from joining the family dinner. And so, in a rather awkward situation, I had to figure out how to resolve it. I invite you all to listen to this story, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to follow more interesting stories. If you've ever faced similar situations in your family, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really looking forward to your feedback. My mother-in-law banned me from dinner. I laughed and asked the restaurant host for a seat. Matra looked at me before shaking her head. "Sorry, ma'am, but there is no reservation under your name," she said. I blinked a bit, feeling slightly unsettled, but quickly regained my composure. "That can't be! I was invited to dinner with my wife's family. They should be here by now." She smiled, gently but firmly. "I checked for a reservation for 6 under the name Morgan Sinclair. There's nothing." A brief silence settled between us. Matra looked at the list, and I stared at her face, sensing the determination in her eyes. This wasn't the first time I felt pushed into a difficult situation with this family, but this time it was different. I couldn't let her or anyone in my wife's family think I was someone who could be easily pushed around. "My mother-in-law made the reservation," I said, keeping my tone gentle, but my patience was starting to wear thin. "I just need a seat at the family table. I don't want to make a scene, but I'm certain I was invited." Matra didn't respond immediately, quietly looking at her computer, double-checking the reservation. She lowered her head, trying to find a reasonable explanation for the situation. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was being shut out, like my presence wasn't welcome. That feeling irritated me. After a few tense minutes, Matra looked up again and said, "I'm really sorry, but there is no reservation under your name. If you don't have a booking, I'm afraid we can't assist further." I looked at her cold, unfeeling face, then turned to look at my mother-in-law, who was standing beside her, her expression unchanged. She stood there without a hint of sympathy. I could sense the satisfaction in her eyes, as if she were waiting for some kind of spectacle. And I knew it wasn't just her, but the whole of my wife's family was waiting for a weak reaction from me. I couldn't do that. Not this time. Not when things had gone too far. "That's impossible," I said, trying to remain calm, even though my chest was tightening. "I was invited here to have dinner with my family. Why are you treating me like this?" My mother-in-law looked at me again, her smile cold. "Do you really think you deserve to sit here? You're just an outsider, someone who will never truly belong in this family." I felt her cold gaze, but it didn't make me back down. Over the years, I had learned to face harsh words, to endure pain, and today would be no different. "Do you really think I'm not worthy?" I asked, looking deep into her eyes. "I may not be the ideal person in your family's eyes, but I've spent my whole life building my career and my life. I won't let anyone deny that." My mother-in-law didn't react. She just stood silently, staring at me. But for the first time, I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. This was something I'd never seen from her before. She had always been strong, always in control of everything. But today, I saw her losing that confidence. The whole space was silent. People around us began moving, and I could hear the clinking of glasses as they were placed on tables. My eyes remained locked on my mother-in-law, not allowing her to gain the upper hand. Suddenly, another voice spoke, soft yet powerful. "She's right." Daniel's voice, the restaurant owner, rang out from behind. All eyes turned, and I saw Daniel walking in, smiling politely. He was the owner I was very familiar with, someone who had always treated me with respect, something I had never received from my wife's family. "Mrs. Sinclair," Daniel said, looking at my mother-in-law with formal respect. "I've heard a lot about you, but I also know Claire very well. She's not someone you can disrespect like that." My mother-in-law went silent, unable to respond. Daniel's words seemed to confirm that I wasn't just an outsider, but part of this family, whether she liked it or not. "I think we can make a space for Claire to sit," Daniel said, turning to Matra, who was now looking at me in surprise. "She's my guest. Please prepare a table for her." My mother-in-law stood still, her gaze shifting slightly. I looked at her, smiling gently, but inside, it was like a storm was brewing. Her cowardice only made me more determined. I stood firm and turned to look at Adam, who was still standing there, silent. His gaze was empty. Maybe he didn't know what to do in this situation either. "So, I'll sit here," I said, looking into my mother-in-law's face. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to prove that I'm not someone who can be easily dismissed." My mother-in-law looked at me one last time, but this time she couldn't say anything more. She just stood there, speechless. I had won this battle, but my victory wasn't because I had support from anyone. It came from my resilience, from not allowing anyone, not her, not this family, to decide my worth. The moment I turned back to look at my mother-in-law, I could feel the coldness from her sharp gaze. It had been a long time since she had treated me so openly like this, but I knew I couldn't let her words hurt me. Even though my pride was being threatened, I wasn't going to let it make me lose myself. My mother-in-law sneered, her eyes lighting up with a sense of amusement, as if she was waiting for me to back down. She had always seen me as an outsider, as a piece that didn't quite fit into her family. But today, I decided I wouldn't stand silently in the shadow of her disdain any longer. "Do you think you deserve to sit here?" Morgan asked again, this time her tone not only challenging but laced with mockery. The table fell silent and I could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was watching me, as if they were waiting for some sort of reaction, and all of them expected me to bow my head and admit defeat. But I wasn't that person. I had grown enough to understand that sometimes silence is the strongest form of strength. So I didn't rush to respond immediately. Instead, I kept a calm, gentle smile, but it was full of resolve. The feeling of being insulted was clear, but I didn't let it show. I turned to Matra, the restaurant staff member who had been standing silently as though waiting for a signal from me. "Matra, could you please call the restaurant owner?" I asked gently, keeping my emotions out of my voice. Morgan immediately laughed, the contempt in her voice clearly visible. "Oh, really? You think the restaurant owner will come out here just because you asked?" I turned back to look at her, my gaze unwavering. "Yes, that's right. Because the owner of this restaurant knows me very well." My words had an unexpected strength, and the atmosphere grew quieter. Morgan seemed to have anticipated my response, but I could see doubt starting to form in her eyes. She had never seen me resist so firmly before, and I knew she hadn't expected this. Less than a minute later, Daniel Leon, the restaurant owner, entered. He was a man in his 50s, tall, elegant, and authoritative. His silver hair seemed to shimmer under the lights, making him look even more charismatic and imposing. As soon as Morgan saw Daniel, she went silent. I knew she didn't like his presence because Daniel and I had a good relationship. He was one of the few people in the elite circle that she couldn't easily manipulate. The tension in the air grew even thicker. Daniel, with his confident demeanor, walked toward us. His gaze swept across the table, stopping on Morgan's face. Then he turned to me, offering a soft, knowing smile. "Claire, I've heard about the situation." Daniel spoke, his voice deep but authoritative. He looked toward my mother-in-law without backing down. "It seems there's been a mix-up with the seating." Morgan stared at him, her expression shifting from arrogance to a hint of worry. Daniel wasn't someone easily influenced, and she knew that. She stopped laughing, and instead, there was an awkward silence. I didn't laugh or feel any sense of victory in that moment, but I knew I had done the right thing. I didn't need to explain too much, because Daniel's presence was the clearest explanation. He was a person with influence in this world, and him standing by my side was a confirmation of the respect I deserved. "Thank you, Daniel," I said gently, offering a grateful smile. Daniel merely smiled and nodded, as if everything had been resolved. "It's a small matter, Claire. Everything will be fine." The atmosphere around us gradually lightened. My mother-in-law said nothing more, and the eyes around the table no longer looked at me with disdain. Instead, I could sense a small shift. Maybe today, I hadn't completely changed how they saw me, but at least I had shown them that I wasn't a weak person, easily bullied. After Daniel left, the mood in the room became lighter, but I knew I had won a small victory in this life, and no matter the challenges ahead, I would never back down. He was the powerful owner, with sharp eyes and a smile that radiated confidence. His presence made all eyes turn toward him, and my mother-in-law, who was trying to maintain her own confident attitude, couldn't hide her surprise. Morgan stared at Daniel, her eyes wide open, clearly unable to believe what was happening. She had thought she could easily impose her will on everything in this family, but Daniel was siding with me, and that left her visibly shocked. "Daniel, I came here for this reason," I said gently, not taking my eyes off my mother-in-law. "It would be an oversight not to have my name on the list." Daniel looked at me kindly, his gaze showing not only politeness, but also deep respect. He turned to Morgan, unflinching, and gave her a welcoming smile. This made her feel like she was being pushed into a situation she couldn't control. "Sorry, Mrs. Sinclair," Daniel began, but his tone showed no hint of submission. "I've checked, and indeed there's been a seating mix-up tonight. Claire is a guest of the family, and I've made sure she has a proper seat." Morgan tried to stay calm, but the tension was evident in the stiffening of her shoulders and the clenching of her hands. With my husband's support, but now with an outsider, especially Daniel, whom she couldn't manipulate, standing by me, she couldn't help but feel anxious. She turned to look at me, and this time her gaze wasn't filled with contempt as before. However, there was still a hint of challenge in her eyes, but I could sense that she was beginning to realize things weren't as easy as they once were. "Claire, I don't think I need to explain any further," she spoke, her tone somewhat gentler, though the underlying annoyance was impossible to hide. I didn't respond immediately. I knew that there was no need to say too much. Everything was already clear, and nothing could change the truth. Daniel's presence here was the strongest affirmation for me, and I could feel his strength. He wasn't just a restaurant owner. He was someone who could make a difference in situations like this. "So, where will I sit?" I asked gently, trying to remain calm and polite. Daniel smiled, his gaze still full of respect and warmth. "You'll sit right here, Claire. We've prepared a seat for you." As Daniel gestured to a table nearby, I noticed the entire room seemed to calm down. My mother-in-law stood still, looking at me for a moment before gently turning away. She no longer had the challenging look, nor the contempt, but I could never forget how she had always treated me as an outsider all these years. I sat down softly, feeling the warmth of the new seat prepared for me. Things were no longer tense, but in my heart, I knew I had won a significant battle. Adam didn't say anything, but I could sense a subtle change in his gaze. His two sisters remained silent, not looking in my direction. Though they didn't speak, I could feel that my presence in this family, even with my mother-in-law's approval, would never be fully accepted. But tonight, I had shown everyone that I wasn't someone easily oppressed, that I wasn't someone who could be pushed back just because of petty words. And I knew that, while this didn't completely change everything, at least I had proven that I deserved a place in this life. My mother-in-law didn't say anything further, but in her eyes, I could see hesitation. She knew that I wasn't someone easily defeated. And perhaps one day, she would have to accept my presence in this family, not because she wanted to, but because I had proven my worth. Standing there, I felt like a new person. With every step I took away from that house, I could feel the freedom, the tranquility in my soul that I had never experienced before. Morgan, she had always believed she was the powerful one, able to control everything in this family, from the way we ate, to the respect we showed, to our relationships. But she was so wrong. Today, she not only lost her power within the family, but also received a look of utter disappointment from her own son. Adam looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion, unable to comprehend what had just happened. But exactly, I didn't want him to understand. Because from now on, I no longer had any obligation to explain myself to anyone about my choices. I was strong enough to stand on my own, to make decisions that were best for me. As for his mother, Morgan, she would no longer control me. She would no longer push me back every time she issued a command. Tonight marked a significant turning point in my life. All these years, I had been too weak, too submissive, but now I had learned how to protect myself and reclaim what I deserved. I was no longer the girl who could be bullied, the woman who was looked down upon. When I stepped out of that house, it wasn't because I was scared, but because I was simply too tired of the power games in that family. I had reached the point where I realized that I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I had enough. When I returned to my apartment, I didn't feel any regret. It felt like a door had closed, but another one had opened, wide and full of hope. I knew I wouldn't have to go back, that I wouldn't have to endure things from others that I didn't deserve anymore. I sat down on the sofa, poured myself a glass of champagne, and looked out the window, where the city lights shone brightly, reflecting the faint glow in the night. I felt free, like I had just won a major battle, and this was the well-deserved reward for my resilience. When my phone buzzed, I didn't rush to answer. It was Adam calling again. But this time, I wasn't in a hurry to worry. I smiled, gently set my glass of champagne down and swiped my finger across the screen. "Can we talk?" he asked. I had already blocked his number, and I knew that was the right decision. There was nothing left to say, no reason to explain. I didn't need to continue this conversation. I had everything I needed, my freedom and the right to choose for myself. For the first time in my life, I felt stronger than ever, no longer dependent, no longer someone who had to endure being controlled by others. I was the only one with the right to decide my own life. And that was the most powerful thing I had ever done.